The most dangerous person isn't someone who doesn't care. It's someone who once cared too much and decided they've had enough. We often think danger lies within cruelty, arrogance, or manipulation, but real danger quietly grows in the heart of an empath pushed too far. Someone who spent years pouring unconditional kindness into others until there was nothing left but empty, aching exhaustion. When empathy repeatedly collides with betrayal, neglect, and emotional abuse, a transformation occurs deep within the psyche, turning tenderness into a silent, razor-sharp clarity. It's not anger that awakens. It's something colder, deeper, and far more unsettling. It's the chilling realization that kindness can be weaponized, that intuition, once a tool of comfort, becomes a blade capable of slicing through lies and manipulation. Have you ever felt kindness drain out of you, replaced by something colder, sharper, something almost frightening? Have you reached that moment when compassion no longer feels safe because your kindness has repeatedly invited harm? Carl Jung spoke of anima and animus, our inner feminine and masculine energies that shape our subconscious. But there's a side to this duality rarely spoken of: the dark transformation. When an empath's natural sensitivity is continuously exploited, the suppressed anima or animus can erupt violently from the unconscious. This eruption is not explosive, but icy, precise, and quietly ruthless. It forges an entirely new persona, one that defends boundaries with shocking decisiveness. A persona so foreign and powerful, it might even startle the empath who created it. But what exactly turns the gentlest empath into someone more dangerous than even the most skilled narcissist? The answer lies not in what's lost, but in the frightening power of what emerges in its place. For years, Daniel was the kind of man who carried warmth into every room he entered. At 35, he'd built a reputation, not just for professional reliability, but for emotional generosity. Friends, coworkers, even casual acquaintances, they all knew him as the one person who'd always listen, who'd lend a hand without expecting anything in return. His empathy was his greatest strength, and quietly his most profound vulnerability. Behind closed doors, however, Daniel paid the price for his gift. Friends leaned on him relentlessly, pulling from his reservoir of patience and kindness until he was left exhausted, hollowed out. Colleagues capitalized on his gentle nature, knowing he would pick up the slack without complaint. Yet he convinced himself this was simply his role, to absorb others' pain, to hold space for everyone else's chaos. It felt noble, necessary even. But then came a betrayal that broke his invisible threshold. It wasn't loud, wasn't explosive, it was subtle and insidious. Daniel discovered one night, almost by accident, that his closest friend, the one person he'd trusted completely, had meticulously used Daniel's reputation as a stepping stone. Quietly, deliberately, this friend had spread half-truths and twisted narratives, sabotaging Daniel's credibility to advance his own career. The realization didn't crash into Daniel. It seeped into him like ice water, numbing everything it touched. For the first time, Daniel didn't cry, didn't plead for explanations, didn't rage at the injustice. He simply stood in the silence, feeling something inside him shift with chilling precision. The gentle empath in him didn't vanish. It hardened, crystallized into something fierce and unyielding. It was a quiet awakening, terrifying in its clarity. Have you noticed how sharply your perception changes once someone pushes you past your breaking point? It's like a curtain lifting suddenly, revealing hidden truths you've overlooked for years. Vulnerabilities, manipulations, the subtle ways people exploit your empathy. For Daniel, this shift was shocking. His heightened sensitivity, once dedicated solely to understanding and comforting others, now honed itself into an instrument of ruthless discernment. When an empath reaches this place, they don't crumble, they evolve. The profound depth of their wounds activates an instinctive, almost primal protection. Psychologically, empathy pushed beyond its limit triggers an unconscious defensive mechanism, sharper and more insightful than even the most cunning narcissist's manipulations. Empaths see through illusions, read unspoken motivations, and predict intentions with eerie accuracy. This isn't a conscious strategy, it's a visceral survival response rising from the shadow of their own psyche. This dark shift, the shadow integration, forces empaths to abandon the innocence they once cherished. Daniel, who had always navigated the world through kindness, found himself guided by something new. Cold intuition and razor-edged clarity. Previously hidden or suppressed qualities within him surged forth, changing not only how he perceived others, but how he interacted with the world itself. He didn't become cruel, but he became decisive, controlled, and startlingly detached when setting boundaries. This internal metamorphosis had tangible effects. Friends who'd grown accustomed to Daniel's limitless availability found themselves abruptly facing walls where open doors once stood. Coworkers who'd casually exploited his willingness now hesitated, unsettled by the distance he carefully maintained. Daniel didn't offer explanations anymore. He didn't reassure. His silence spoke volumes, radiating an unsettling confidence. He became unreadable, enigmatic, no longer easily influenced or emotionally manipulated. In this newfound clarity, Daniel's professional and personal relationships shifted dramatically. He no longer reacted according to others' expectations, no longer provided the comfortable emotional safety net they'd previously taken for granted. People sensed a new presence, quiet, potent, unpredictable, and it made them deeply uncomfortable. His energy, once soft and yielding, now carried an invisible but palpable force field. Yet the real danger in Daniel wasn't aggression. It wasn't vengeance or hostility. The true threat lay precisely in his reclaimed empathy, redirected inward, serving him first, unerringly protecting his core identity. It became impossible to manipulate him not because he'd lost compassion, but because he'd finally learned to weaponize his intuitive understanding of human nature in his own defense. Think deeply about this. The empath doesn't become dangerous by losing their empathy. They become dangerous because their empathy now serves themselves first, making them impossible to manipulate. But what if the danger wasn't in what the empath could do to others, but in the brutal clarity they now have about themselves? Here's the paradox no one prepares you for. An empath becomes truly dangerous not when they lash out, but precisely when they stop hurting themselves to spare others. For the first time, their empathy ceases to be a sacrifice, transforming instead into a shield of ruthless, unbreakable clarity. They step into the quiet authority of someone who no longer needs validation, permission, or explanation to enforce their boundaries. This shift, subtle yet profound, rearranges the dynamics of every relationship around them, leaving those who once manipulated them feeling exposed, disoriented, and ultimately powerless. Consider empathy as a double-edged blade. Initially, an empath wields only one side of the blade, sharp, precise, and dedicated solely to healing wounds, protecting vulnerabilities, and carving spaces of comfort for those around them. For years, this blade glides carefully, almost invisibly through others' lives, quietly stitching emotional wounds, soothing pain, and rebuilding what's broken. But when pushed to the brink of exhaustion, betrayal, and deep emotional fatigue, the empath inevitably flips that blade inward. Not to harm, but to sever toxic ties, slice away manipulation, and carve out space for their own peace. This internal turn of the blade is gentle in its execution, but brutal in its effectiveness. The empath who once prioritized the comfort and approval of everyone around them now channels their empathetic insight inward, erecting an impenetrable wall forged from self-respect, dignity, and hard-earned wisdom. This barrier, invisible yet absolute, repels any further attempts at emotional exploitation. The quiet assertiveness now radiating from them unsettles those who once held power over them, not because they fear attack, but because the empath no longer provides vulnerability as leverage. Have you realized the true power in knowing exactly where your empathy ends and your self-respect begins? It's a stark moment of awakening. It's the realization that the strength to say no without explanation, without apology, is itself an act of profound kindness toward yourself. But this kindness feels utterly foreign at first. It feels uncomfortable, like betrayal to your former self. Yet the discomfort is necessary. It's the sensation of reclaiming territory you've lost piece by piece, kindness by kindness, compromise by compromise. This reclaimed territory is sacred ground, untouchable now. Empaths at this stage don't become bitter or harsh. They become decisive and intentional. Their gentleness transforms from a weakness into an unequivocal strength. The empath's innate ability to sense others' intentions, once used exclusively to foster understanding, becomes their ultimate defense mechanism. It enables them to perceive manipulation instantly, rendering emotional predators powerless. They no longer offer up their kindness indiscriminately. Instead, they ration their compassion deliberately, carefully selecting who deserves their emotional investment. Yet the greatest danger of the empath is not in vengeance or retaliation. It's their newfound capacity to dismantle illusions effortlessly. They see through false charm, empty promises, and subtle manipulations with piercing accuracy, disarming manipulators before they can even launch their tactics. This quiet psychological power, rooted in emotional intelligence sharpened through pain, can unsettle even the most skilled narcissist because it renders their carefully crafted strategies useless. Empaths don't gain this clarity by accident. They pay for it dearly with scars invisible yet profound. Each act of betrayal, each instance of exploitation, carves a lesson into their psyche, refining their intuition into something unerringly precise. When an empath finally reaches this point, fed up, exhausted, yet crystal clear in their sense of self, they become impossible to fool, difficult to influence, and dangerous to those who depend on their naivety. At this juncture, others begin noticing the empath's silence, the quiet calmness that's settled within them, no longer driven by the urge to please or justify. This silence speaks louder than words. It carries the weight of every boundary crossed, every betrayal endured, every wound that has healed into wisdom. It communicates clearly that the empath's kindness is now reserved exclusively for authenticity, respect, and genuine reciprocity. But here's the uncomfortable truth that even the most manipulative narcissist fears. When the empath finally embraces their inner shadow, they don't become villains. They become something much scarier. People who know exactly who they are and what they'll never allow again. This transformation isn't about revenge. It's not about cruelty or bitterness. It's about a profound, irreversible shift, a reclaiming of personal power, clarity, and dignity. For perhaps the first time, empaths who reach this point stand in full alignment with their inner truth, no longer apologizing for their boundaries or justifying their self-respect. The shadows they've integrated no longer threaten their kindness. Instead, they amplify it, giving their compassion direction, purpose, and depth. Have you ever stopped to consider the extraordinary power that comes from recognizing your own worth so vividly that manipulation becomes transparent, even trivial? Can you feel the strength that rises when you finally acknowledge that your empathy, this precious gift you've given so freely, can now serve you first? It's a moment of liberation, raw and beautiful, where you realize that guarding your heart isn't selfishness. It's survival, wisdom, and true self-love. Your gentleness is no longer scattered carelessly. It's guarded fiercely, offered selectively. Your energy becomes sacred territory, no longer available for exploitation or emotional plunder. This shift is quiet but profound, subtle but undeniable. It reshapes not only how others perceive you, but more importantly, how you see yourself. The empath who's had enough isn't dangerous because they wish to cause harm. They're dangerous because they know precisely what they deserve and refuse anything less. They become immovable in their authenticity, unshakable in their clarity, and relentless in their pursuit of inner peace. So, if you're a fed-up empath who's finally found your strength, type "fed-up empath" below. Let this be your quiet revolution. Let it be a declaration, not loud, not confrontational, but quietly powerful, signifying that you've finally chosen yourself. Because perhaps, after all this time, the greatest strength isn't found in how deeply you care for others, but in how fiercely and unapologetically you now care for yourself.